Okay, so we're chatting today. Keysource has been very, very busy, I think it's fair to say, over the last few months. So there's plenty to chat about. And I guess one of the more, well, interesting, inverted commas, but something perhaps a little bit different for yourselves is you're looking at sort of a focus on cybersecurity. So perhaps you can just share what it is you've been up to around that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, for us, cybersecurity is a really important area for the data center sector to focus on over the next few years. It's something that's not really been invested in heavily or dealt with. So, we've covered it in part with our State of the Industry report that's recently been released. I think in that report there was something around 52% of the respondents said that they were concerned about security, and there's a lot in there about the data center being a soft underbelly of our critical infrastructure around the fact that it's not regulated, and this is it's not new news. It's sort of been covered on a number of points, but it's a key investment area. So Keysource has taken two key steps to cover that, and one is our own personal business security. So we've invested heavily in a security or cyber security specialist, which looks after our critical information and supports the secure operating center that we run here at Keysource for our critical infrastructure clients. And then also we've got the relationship now with the acquisition of Dial, and Dial's got a real focus around advisory on digital infrastructure assets, and in particular cyber security. So it's absolutely a growing concern, I think, in the industry, and something that Keysource and Dial we're taking big steps to cover off for our customers.
And I guess as well as part, it seems to be as a company there's a trend, or you have an objective to sort of develop your skills base, right across the data center industry. So whether you can share plans or not, but in general, where do you think you are in terms of establishing that? Because you mentioned Dial, and I had a chat with Mike West the other week, which again is actually in a different video interview, and I know you also have links with a legal firm and stuff like that. So do you think you've got most of the data center bases covered, or are there other things you might want to add at some stage?
Yeah, I think it's a continual evolution. We're not going to stand still. We're looking at how what steps and measures we're taking, and tools and technologies are going to adapt, and so are the hackers and the challenges that the data center industry has. It's going to change over time. So we've seen just network access points and network access control systems change over time. That's sort of the traditional perimeter security systems, and then systems like Darktrace have come in with much more around looking for anomalies in behaviour, both of individuals and systems, to see where perhaps people have been able to expose or find weakness within the infrastructure. So a continual evolution really from our side on that, and as a business, Keysource has never stood still in the 40 years of operating, and in my 12 years of being here, it's been a change, and we've evolved to broaden our skill set, even with the likes of the managed service contracts that we now offer our customers across the colo and public sector at the moment, with the likes of the Metropolitan Police and others.
Yeah, a mention of them, but your customer, you've had some good customer wins in recent times. So perhaps you could just give us again some sort of overview of some of those, and maybe the University of Leicester, you can give us a little bit of details about that sort of contract.
Yeah, absolutely. Really exciting time at Keysource. Lots of great wins to talk about, and it's great. It's been a great business, even through COVID. Obviously, a lot of people have been continuing without change. Data center industry has probably grown even more so with the importance of IT and infrastructure on remote working and lights out facilities, etc. So across the board, consultancy, master planning, technical due deal services for acquisitions, and builds and critical FM services. Really across the board, we've had some real good success and wins, of which we'll be sharing more news soon. So you mentioned there a couple. So University of Leicester, a long-standing customer of ours. We worked with them for 11 plus years, building a number of facilities, a lot of air-cooled, high-performance computing across their physics and computer center data centers on campus. And that's been really driven by the DRAC and the Alice high performance compute clusters. And it's really been a journey. It's an exciting one that we've been on with them using eco-free. Some of the first facilities that we did with them were some of the most efficient in the UK and in Europe. And now the recent project we've just completed for them has introduced direct liquid cooled compute into those same facilities and incorporating them into the existing chilled water system. So the same chilled water system is providing cooling for both the air-cooled high-performance compute and the direct liquid-cooled systems. And that was in partnership with the University of Leicester, HPE and Keysource. So, really keen and interested to see the results, really, of the two different approaches working side by side and how each performs.
And then, funny enough, my home territory originally, London Borough of Hillingdon. You've been, I think it's a renewal of a managed service contract. So again, a bit of history about that would be good. Yeah,
absolutely. We do a lot around London. Obviously a lot of the big operators are in London, as well as the financial houses. So we work with lots of different organisations. Hillingdon, one of the councils. We work with others, like Camden as well. And recently it's been about supporting strategy and transformation. They're obviously often a bit behind the trend in terms of co-location and outsourcing, etc. So helping them to get up to speed and incorporate into some of the other sort of co-located public sector organisations and using stuff like Crown Commercial Services to do that. With Hillingdon in particular, we've done extended a 10+ year relationship, and I mentioned Leicester earlier. We've got really strong relationships with our customers, backed up by, I think it's 97% retention rate for existing service customers and something like an 87% win rate. So really successful when we focus on the relationship. And Hillingdon in particular has been a great success story across both critical facilities maintenance and also managed services. But the latest one is an extension of that contract to support Hillingdon's critical infrastructure estate. So predominantly the engineering, UPS, cooling systems, etc. And another one in London that we've done recently and not long ago announced was the support of the China Telecom project in London, just off Bank. And that's for a large Chinese financial that they're delivering the project for. So our services for them is, it's a long-standing relationship that we've had that goes back sort of 3-4 years now with China Telecom. Delivered a number of projects for them. This has been focused very much on the sort of self-delivery of installation of the M&E services and supporting their project as well from a critical monitoring and technology standpoint. So very good relationship with China Telecom, good working partnership, and this is just another success story on that journey, really. And I think the key thing from our perspective there as well is that self-delivery of that service. So we've invested quite heavily in with the managed services and with the critical facilities engineering contracts is developing that in-house engineering resource, because that really underpins the quality of our service and the agility of our ability to support our customers as well.
Maybe if it's not too greedy, before we move on to all things environmental, which obviously is topical at the moment, I think back in perhaps slightly earlier in the year, you announced a contract with Garmin. So again, if there's any particular angle on that, which would be interesting to share.
Yeah, again, a name that's very familiar for those that have been at Keysource. We worked with them a number of times. So they've come back again, and we've had a couple of really good success stories in recent months. One is a critical service contract for their key site in Southampton. So we're doing a bit of live upgrade work there, as well as picking up the maintenance contract again with the team over at Garmin. And then also venturing off into Europe again and supporting their project in Poland. So actually deploying a hack and an edge server room or data center for them in Poland. So we've actually done a number of projects in recent years in Europe, even through COVID and Brexit. It's not been an easy time to do that, of course, but it's been certainly a solid route for us. And international work is really a key growth area for Keysource, and there'll be some more exciting news in the coming weeks in terms of some new office setups that we're doing internationally as well. So I can't disclose anything quite yet, but some of the dial expansion into some areas, as well as Keysource itself, strengthening our position certainly within Europe and another area as well, which we'll disclose so shortly. But yeah, very, very interesting times, and Garmin, a great company to work with. Just seeing the transformation of their technology has been fascinating, coming from sat navs to enabled sports watches and those types of devices that are helping us to use data on the move, which ties in quite nicely with some of the other topics that we were going to talk about around edge, the use of data, etc. So it's an interesting use case for that technology, and something I guess we've all been using more of in lockdown. Everyone seems to be going through those waves of exercise and sport, coupled with then a few tipples as we get close to Christmas and a bit to eat. So.
Oh, that's great. And I expect by the time this video actually gets broadcast, as it were, the COP26, it won't be a distant memory, but it will be a memory of some sort. So perhaps if we move on to sustainability, and I know it's a big topic, but I just wondered whether you perhaps could share some thoughts, whether yours or Keysource's, in terms of what you think the data center industry has achieved so far, sustainability wise, and maybe then perhaps one or two things you think either are on the agenda or should be on the agenda. Sort of, I know everyone talks about net zero, and I think there are various initiatives in the industry, some for 2030, some for 2050, etc. But just your sort of thoughts as to what's been achieved so far and what might be possible.
Yeah, no, I think it's obviously an important topic for everyone, and especially at this time when the world is kind of looking at Glasgow and seeing what are we committing to as nations. So, as an industry, I think we've always had an eye on efficiency. PUE as a metric, although not perfect by any means, has always been a bit of a measure internally within organisations as to how they're performing and how we can design better and more efficiently. The advent of modular technology and that approach has been an important factor as well to kind of hone in on the changing loads as technology and load moves from on-premise to colo and cloud. So modular technology is a key enabler, and alongside that, from our perspective, we've done a lot around cooling controls and the types of innovations. Really, eco-free has been one that's been around for a number of years that we've really pioneered and driven. But I think cooling optimizations are still an important area for us, and something that, in terms of the scope 1, scope 3 type requirements, is an important factor as well. So where we talk about scope 3 and the client services, so they're not ones that are delivering themselves, but for example, for an organisation, an enterprise or a blue chip company being in a co-location facility, that co-location facility becomes a scope 3, right? We're all someone's scope 3. And so it's important that, and we're seeing this a lot more now with our energy optimization studies, or EOSs, where we're working with the co-location, the operator, and the end user around the table to optimize that facility and to make a collective effort to reduce the carbon footprint and improve efficiency for those facilities. And some of those facilities have been there a long time and maybe are only operating at 30 or 40% of the design load. And so, aging infrastructure, but can still be improved. And I think that's the important thing, is that we look at those facilities, no matter how old they are, and we look to optimize them in line with reducing carbon footprint. But I think optimization is a really important factor for everybody in the industry, but also when we talk about building new or doing life cycle replacements, I think what we don't do as well is look at the embedded carbon within the infrastructure that we're building or we're installing. And so, in part with that, I think we should be both, in fact, everybody at every level, consultants, builders, operators, and end users, look at the embedded carbon and, start asking questions really about, how much the carbon does it cost to build a facility, or how much carbon does it cost to replace the infrastructure, and look at the total carbon cost for whatever projects that we're looking at moving forward. And in part, manufacturers should be looking to provide the environmental performance declarations, or EPDs. And I think we should be asking for those, that type of information, because a lot of those manufacturers are looking at where they're sourcing steel from. I know some of them are sourcing old automotive steel for reuse, and so people are starting to look at it, but people just aren't asking questions. So I think we've done a lot of really good stuff when it comes to efficient designs, modular designs, but equally, I think we could be doing a lot more in terms of optimization, reviewing how things are actually running after the design, asking questions about embedded carbon, and working closer with our colleagues over in IT to try and get closer to a more harmonious relationship when it comes to designing right. And another factor, just to mention, is obviously resilience, one that we talk about a lot and is a core pillar of our industry. But question there, do we over engineer solutions? And I think in some of these cases we do. Could the environment, could the ecosystem work smarter in terms of dynamically relocating load to other facilities, other data centers, to avoid having a fully rated tier 4 or tier 3 facility? Absolutely. I think that approach is there and can hopefully not only improve efficiency on site, but also reduce that embedded carbon from the point of view of construction. Lots of different parts to talk about there, but
that's good. I mean, the scope 3 I'm interested in, because I'm just wondering, I mean, supply chains are in the news for many reasons at the moment, but do you think the data center, you alluded to obviously the embedded carbon, which is part of that, but do you think at some stage in the future it will not be sustainable to source a UPS system from sort of halfway around the world? Do you think manufacturing and supply chains will shrink, not just obviously because it might actually make them more resilient, but because from a carbon footprint point of view, it's kind of only logical that the shorter distances everything travels has to make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got to think about where manufacturing is happening, the travel, but also where is that country or that factory sourcing its power? What's sustaining that power? Where are the materials? And actually, if we're geographically disparate in terms of where we're manufacturing things, are we close enough to actually know the truth of what's happening and where those materials are coming from? So definitely, manufacturing's got to shift, and I think we've got to look at that, and travel's a huge part of it. But I think again, it's one key factor. Energy production, which is not something we can directly influence when it comes to the grid. But I think, again, that's another key topic when it comes to building data center campuses or looking at locations moving forward, because certainly in the UK, we've not got an unlimited supply of power, and there's not a plan for the government at the moment to deploy large new power generation in the UK. So I think the grid can only carry so much. Renewable energy can only go so far, and it kind of gets mixed into a hybrid network. And you might be paying for renewables, but you're actually getting renewables yourself. Maybe data centers, when they're looking in the UK, it's not going to be about latency and location, but it might be more about power. And whether that's the likes of Rolls-Royce looking at the mini nuclear reactors, and campuses being built around that type of new infrastructure, or whether it's looking at more about renewables and certainly direct wire from existing or new renewable infrastructure, be that wind, hydro, or other. So I think, for us in the UK, looking at the infrastructure, power is a key thing, both from a carbon footprint perspective, and whilst we can't build our own utilities, I think we can certainly influence where we build as a collective. And I think maybe some new sites outside of Manchester and London might be looking at renewables as a key driver for that. So.
And perhaps, I'm wondering globally, I know talking to the data center folks in, well, I suppose Iceland and the Nordics, most obviously, they seem to have fairly plentiful renewable resources. Do you think there's likely to be a small or even a large exodus of data centers? Obviously, latency for certain things is critical, so therefore the data center has to be within a fairly close location of the application. But for many of us, a millisecond here or there really is nothing. So could you see a stage when, okay, not great for the UK or other maybe European countries, southern mid-European countries, but more and more data centers do get moved sort of closer to the colder areas of the world because it makes, again, sort of environmental sense, if not financial sense?
Yeah, I think there's always been a trend, right, to look at those type of colder environments or areas that have got a large amount of hydro power. And Iceland's a great example where they've got an abundance of, they've got more renewables than they can use, right? All of their pavements are underpinned by district heating, reuse of that hot water from the geothermal sources. Hydro's huge for them as well, and they've got the ability to export. We recently run a wire from Norway as well in terms of access to power from Norway. So that's another huge plus for us in terms of being able to draw down from another source outside of I think France. But in terms of trends, and I think latency is still a key trend that's growing in terms of the location. I think regional deployments are still going to be key. I think renewables can influence some part of that story, but ultimately, the consumers, the low latency requirements are still going to drive local in-country data center requirements alongside things like data sovereignty as well. Still being there and still meaning that we need to store locally and manage that data locally as well. I think there's still a big story for the UK when it comes to the data center industry for sure. But a big player around edge, and I think, as I say, it's really about power generation and maybe co-locating the next campus somewhere near a power generation nuclear facility or with direct wire with a lot of hydro or wind.
And something's just occurred to me. So, maybe not, but the COP is looking to, this 1.5 rise in temperature is the sort of cap beyond which everything goes a bit pear-shaped or more pear-shaped, should we say? Has anyone, I'm just intrigued, has anyone else sort of modelled the different temperature rises as it may impact on the data? Imagine if there was your sort of global rise of 4 degrees, and that might put a bit of strain on the, the current sort of cooling requirements and require rather more energy, etc. Or do you think the industry is ahead of any temperature rises? I'm just intrigued as to anyone sort of looks at that.
But I think it's a good question. I think in terms of the way a lot of the cooling infrastructure, which is what we're largely talking about, being affected by temperature, it's an N+20 type scenario. So it's a worst case in 20 years, which I think will, in the short term, I don't think we're going to experience any major challenges with that. Obviously, there's a reliance there that people are designing for the right temperatures, both high and low. And if that's not done correctly, then capacity will be affected, and that can lead to some outages. So there's always a bit of nervousness when it comes to summer, shall we say? Although not too worrying in the UK because we never quite get it that hot. But certainly a consideration. But I think taking a 20-year view when we're designing these facilities is, I think we're covered in the short term. You think that that those trends are looking at maybe even 2.5 degrees, but not for 100 years or something like that. So I think there's bigger problems in the environment that leads to, right? Maybe flood related incidents increasing, extreme weather in certain areas, that it might be increasing the risk profile of some countries and or locations. But I think from a general design perspective, certainly in the short term, with life cycles of M&E plant being sort of 10 to 15 years, I don't see there being too much of an issue if designed correctly.
In terms of, I think one of the contracts you referenced, liquid cooling. So I'm just interested in your thoughts on that, as to whether it's going to come again. You listen to different people, they obviously have slight angles on it, but some people it's going to take over the world, and others it's not going to go very far, and maybe they're probably going to meet in the middle. Hybrid, the word that is used for virtually every angle of IT these days. Will we end up with hybrid cooling? I mean, any thoughts as to what liquid cooling will or won't sort of offer into the future?
Yeah, like a lot of technology, the industry is very cyclical, right? Liquid cooling is not something new. It's been around for decades, and so it's making a bit of a re-emergence now. In terms of some of the sustainability points, it offers a lot of advantages in terms of a higher grade source of heat that we might be able to reuse. A lot of the air-cooled infrastructure doesn't give you a high quality of heat, and so the ability to reuse that's not as good. So there's a good benefit there. Also footprint, and also the temperatures that you can operate, being the high-grade heat, you can get high levels of free cooling and efficiency. So certainly lots of plus points to direct liquid cooled. The colo operators, they're hedging their bets. I think a lot of them, you're seeing a lot of marketing around stuff like the Open Compute project, or being OCP ready. People considering with new developments how they might incorporate direct liquid cooled, or customers with direct liquid cooled requirements. And there's a couple of different technologies out there. I mean, there's probably like 5 or 6 key ones across maybe 2 different types. You've got the likes of the isotopes and the HPEs that are offering in rack direct liquid cooled technology. So more traditional server-based infrastructure, and then you've got the others like Submer, who are looking at maybe dielectric fluid-based submersive cooling systems. So we've seen the likes of STFC and some of the high-performance cooling specialists. CGG have deployed some of that technology to great success. But really, it's very niche. It's around high-performance computing. That's predominantly research-based, be that education and or number crunching. And I think long-term, the success of direct liquid cooled is going to be driven by probably some of the bigger brands and what technology they start pushing. And that will change people's buying patterns. And then also, it's how easy is it to adopt, and how easy is it to integrate. And I think that's the sort of interesting part for us, where we've seen with HPE and Leicester a great example of collaboration and introducing direct liquid cooled alongside air cooled rather. And I think mentioned hybrid, and it's a bit of a cliche because we use it everywhere, right? But a hybrid environment is critical, because people aren't going to suddenly change all of their kit overnight. The direct liquid cooled, both will have to run side by side, and it's going to be about how easy and how economical that can be done. But definitely a continual growing trend. You see the big brands like HPE have a clear strategy and are pushing that technology, and so it's inevitable that's going to grow. But we're not going to wake up next year or in 5 years' time and everything's going to be direct liquid cooled. It's just not going to happen like that, right? But definitely it's going to be around. It's not going anywhere. It's not going to go away. So definitely something that's here to stay.
And it's funny, you mentioned there obviously the collaboration between a company like HPE and the sort of data center industry. So I'm wondering more generally, everyone focuses, PUE is the measurement of how well run a data center is or isn't, and some people think it's a great idea, and others maybe think it's not perhaps any more fit for purpose, etc. But I guess the point is, the one of the PU is the IT load, and does the data center industry still leave the IT folks just to sort their problems out, or as with this sort of liquid cooling, do you think there's the possibility, or it should have more that the two sides collaborate to address the overall efficiency of the compute, well, I guess the compute environment, if that's what we're calling it, the data center to host, and then all the IT kit that goes in it.
Yeah, I think all those people operating in the white space have to work together, have to collaborate. I think that's a key requirement from a sustainability standpoint. Without communication, without collaboration, we're not really going to be able to solve the global problem that we have today. So I think that's inevitable. I think we've seen some good examples of it recently with the work we've been doing and what success that can bring. I think PUE as a metric is a really simple metric, which means it's easy to understand, easy to use, but also easy to manipulate and to use badly or incorrectly. So for an internal requirement of how am I performing and measuring myself as a data center, it's all right, but you can't compare it with another another client. It doesn't take into account local requirements or specific client requirements, and it can be easily manipulated if you increase the IT load in proportion with the IT, you suddenly become really efficient, even though you're not making any changes on the M&E. And so, and likewise, if you reduce the IT and you reduce your carbon footprint, but you don't change the M&E, it looks really bad. So it's not a balanced view when it comes to actually looking at sustainability. It's okay as a basic metric, and I don't think it's going to go away, but it's good for that basic term. I think more regulation is going to come to the industry. I think that's inevitable. We're effectively another utility when it comes to data and the management of data, production of data. And I think with that, some more focused efforts around measuring up kilowatts and and data in whatever form that might be, kilobits or gigabits or whatever, petabytes, whatever that metric is. I think having a look at the kilowatt input and the data output is probably a better metric for us to be looking at moving forward.
And you referenced Edge a couple of times, and I'm just wondering, because you also mentioned about that it's obviously possible to improve the performance of older data centers, but I'm wondering, does there come a point which you say, you just have to make a decision that a data center that's, older than 10, 15, 20 years is kind of not fit for purpose. Whatever you do to it, you're only going to get so much improvement. And I'm just wondering if you are then going to have to close down a sort of proportion of data centers just because they're not updatable, would that slack, if you like, get taken up by this drive? I think it's IDC or Gartner telling us that 80% of all data is going to be created, processed, whatever, at the edge by, I think it's 2025, which sounds maybe a bit optimistic, but so yeah, I'm just wondering whether retirement of older data centers will correspond to the building of more smaller edge facilities. Any thoughts on that scenario, but also just the edge more generally? I'd be interested in how you see that.
Yeah, edge is really exciting. It's obviously a huge topic. You see a lot of development in that area, the likes of Proximity investing heavily in growing their edge data center estate, and that requirement is growing. It's inevitable. Use cases for it, and actually what's defined as true edge, it is anyone's guess at the moment. I think you can talk about automotive, and you can talk about some really good use of local data, everything from supermarkets, high streets, hospitals. Edge is all about using data locally to make a difference. And so I think the real kind of tipping point, I don't think we've reached it in terms of really going into that edge arena and growing it. I think we've kind of put a focus on it as an industry. Again, it's a bit like liquid cooling, right? Edge isn't new. We've got local networking. We've been doing this sort of thing for a number of years. But I think in terms of a growth in edge, it's happening. It's going to happen. Is that going to take away from some of the regional operating data centers? I don't think so. I think we're talking about different requirements here. I think you're talking about focused compute locally to end users. A lot of processing still happening in the cloud. The cloud is in big data centers at the end of the day, and so I think there's efficiencies in co-location in large facilities, And so, yeah, keeping as much as we can up there, it's going to be easier to manage, easier to operate, and maybe even direct liquid cooled for edge. Some remote technology, remote points is going to be really important. I mean, we are seeing a couple of good use cases of edge with some of the automotive sector, where we have helped to deploy and manage facilities in Lapland to Dubai. So some extreme environmental temperatures, and maybe two areas for us to watch from a COP perspective and an environmental perspective. But yeah, it's definitely a growth area. I think 5G is an interesting one. It's another, it was talked about as another driver for edge. 5G is going to help from a latency perspective to give easy access. But again, that story and that journey is going to be different for each country. Everybody's at a different part in that journey. Korea, probably one of the countries that are leading the way. The UK, we're starting to look at it. But again, what's that going to facilitate? It's going to facilitate the connection or easy connection on a low latency basis with remote edge devices. And so it's all about connectivity, and that's between the mast and that endpoint, really. So there's still a story behind that. There's still compute required behind that. And all we're doing at the moment is increasing demand for data. And so processing on that scale still going to be required. Edge is not going to replace it. We just might package it up in a different way. But it's an interesting space for sure. And something that, exciting to watch. I'm not quite sure where those predictions are going to be in 2025, but hopefully better than the predictions on things like DCIM. We can look and hope, and certainly, there are on the ground as we're deploying stuff. We are seeing new technologies being deployed. We are seeing new requirements coming to the fore, but I think we're some way off realising that tipping point.
Well, we've covered a fair amount of topics. I'd offer you the opportunity if there's anything we've missed out, or maybe just one or two final thoughts as to. It sounds as if you're fairly optimistic. Some people are maybe a bit pessimistic about where it's all headed. You sound quite optimistic that the industry is doing some great stuff and will continue to. But I say any other topics that need to be referenced, or I say just a couple of final thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think there's a couple of the key things from my perspective. Looking at some of the trends. Mentioned about, we talked about sustainability a lot. I think there's got to be a concerted effort for us to talk, more collaboratively through the process. Not be afraid to challenge both customers and also some of the other people in our supply chain. Ask the difficult questions about carbon. Start to get people thinking about it, started to really ask for things that should be provided around the EPDs, start to think about the metrics and the measurements that we're using, which is why we're talking about it, start to align the data and the power in a more constructive way that's measurable and transferable. I think the use of technology, cybersecurity is obviously an important, really important factor to think about. With the old infrastructure, especially some of the old infrastructure being firmware updates and that type of soft underbelly of the industry that we don't talk about probably enough. And I think other new exciting technologies that are there on the cusp, the AI or machine learning, not just for environmental benefits, but also helping with the scarcity of technical resource that we not only face now, as we're seeing in our industry, but across many different industries now. And I think, remote or lights out working, growth in edge, that's magnifying that problem or that challenge. So, some exciting things that we're doing on that front to overcome those challenges and to get a wider reach with the right people and get those, that right knowledge in the right places with the use of technology like augmented reality, coupled with some of the kind of exciting innovations around AI, and looking at sort of behavioural analysis, behavioural analytics, introducing new sensor technology into infrastructure to look at stuff like vibration sensing. Again, not new, but those types of sensing devices where you can leave them alone for a longer period of time and get some early warning in terms of weeks, months even, before incidents happen. So what we're trying to do is work smarter, use technology to help overcome some of these challenges with the growth of edge and global infrastructure projects, and also with the backdrop of that scarcity of technical resource. So another really exciting area for us to be working in at the moment, something I'm quite passionate about and done a lot of work on over the last few years at Keysource. So I think we'll see a lot more around that in the coming years, and those types of smart glass technology that we all look at a bit funny and question what does it actually do. I think it's inevitable that technology is going to be used much more heavily, and also that could help to kind of stimulate some of that 5G edge processing local latency requirements as well with that. So I think from my perspective, that they're the key points from my side. I don't think I'm kind of saying anything new. I think it's a lot of the key topics that we all talk about, but I think the proof is going to be in the action, and really, maybe we've kind of all worried from a sustainability perspective at what the government are going to say or what restrictions are going to be put in place. But maybe we need a bit of that, a bit of a stick to kind of beat us with, to make sure we do change and we change fast, because I think it's the speed of change that we need to really reflect on, and what we need to do to get to that kind of net zero point. But it's achievable. I think is the key point for me to leave on. We've got a chance to influence, we've got a chance to make a change, and it's in our power. So I think it's probably a good point to leave it on, really. But it's been really, really good to talk through the questions and to talk a bit about Keysource and the industry. So thank you for the opportunity.
No, it's been lovely to chat to you. And despite what you said about not saying anything new, I think you have highlighted one or two issues that certainly I hadn't thought about before. So, Richard, really appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
No problem. Thank you very much.